Good morning. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. If everybody could take their seats, we're going to get started. Good morning. I'm Carmel Martin. I'm the Executive Vice President for Policy at the Center for American Progress. I want to thank you for joining us today at the launch event for Teach Strong, a campaign to make modernizing and elevating the teaching profession a top education policy priority in 2016 and beyond. Study after study has shown that there is no in-school factor more important to student outcomes than the teacher at the front of the class. Great teaching matters because the stakes for today's students are so high. To keep pace with an increasingly competitive global economy, our schools must prepare all children for college and career. This also means that the demands on today's teachers are greater than ever. They must teach to high standards, provide individualized instruction to an increasingly diverse student body, impart social and emotional as well as academic skills, and leverage technology that is evolving all the time. Unfortunately, the way we train, support, and develop teachers has changed little, despite the tectonic shifts in teachers' daily realities, making it difficult for them to succeed. Every day, we ask teachers to meet 21st century challenges and demands while working in an 19th century system. At the same time, we face the prospect of teacher shortages as baby boomers retire and young people choose better compensated and more competitive fields. A third-way poll of high-achieving undergraduate students showed that they believe the prestige of the teaching profession is in decline, and as a result, they are reluctant to enter teaching careers. The shortcomings of our teacher pipeline stand in contrast to the teaching systems in high-performing nations such as Canada, Finland, and Korea. These countries have focused on supporting great teaching, thereby fueling dramatically improved student achievement. From selecting and preparing the best teachers to training and cultivating them for leadership, the teacher career path in the U.S. lags behind other nations as well as other professions such as medicine, law, and engineering. In these competitive professions, young people can expect a career trajectory where both compensation and responsibility increases significantly over time. These kinds of advancement opportunities are rare for teachers. And teacher pay seriously lags behind other professions that require college degrees. The average starting teacher salary is just $36,000, 40% lower than that of other college-educated workers. The Teach Strong Coalition was formed to tackle this challenge head-on and spark a national conversation about the future of the teaching profession. The coalition members are 40 of the most influential education organizations in the United States, including both national teacher unions, civil rights groups, teacher voice organizations, and education policy leaders. These education experts, all with diverse perspectives and varying interests, have united around a set of shared principles which you have in front of you. We have come together because we believe that every child deserves a great teacher and every teacher deserves the supports necessary to succeed in the classroom. While no single simple policy fix will be enough to move the teacher pipeline as a whole, systemic change will be critical to the future of the teacher workforce and the nation's students. The Teach Strong campaign is dedicated to breaking through the contentious nature of today's education policy climate and creating the political will necessary to make changes to the profession. Where we will undoubtedly continue to debate issues like testing, we can build a strong consensus among policymakers and advocates who often disagree and make these issues a top priority for education policy. Policymakers have laid the foundation for a better education with higher standards and stronger accountability. To build on those reforms and make our students competitive in the global economy, policy leaders must develop better methods to recruit, support, and compensate teachers. While we may not be able to enact all these changes in the next year, we can set the stage for reform in the coming years by building the case for aligning the profession with 21st century challenges. To begin that conversation, we are lucky to be joined today by two leaders who have already made the teaching profession a policy priority. Republican Governor Terry Branstad of Iowa and Democratic Governor Jack Markell of Delaware are here to discuss their efforts to elevate the teaching profession in their states. While they differ in many policy areas, they both believe attracting and retaining great teachers is a critical first step toward an equitable education system and ensuring success for all students. Governor Branstad has overseen Iowa's teacher leadership and compensation system, which is the centerpiece of his state's landmark 2013 education reform package. This program rewards effective teachers with leadership opportunities and higher pay, offers competitive starting salaries, and provides teachers support and time for collaboration with one another. Governor Branstad has said he believes teacher leadership will drive the other reforms needed to give Iowa schools a world-class education and revitalize the teaching profession. We will hear from Governor Branstad in just a moment, but we're also honored to be joined by Democratic Governor Jack Markell of Delaware. Since taking office in 2009, he has maintained a keen focus on improving Delaware's schools and its workforce development system. In 2010, Delaware won first place in President Obama's Race to the Top competition, and one of the priorities of the Race to the Top was to ensure that teachers and principals had the knowledge and skills they needed to help students graduate from high school ready for college and career. To work towards this goal, Delaware has raised admissions criteria for teacher preparation programs, improved student teaching experience, and changed licensure requirements. In his 2015 State of the State address, Governor Markell said, "We know that nothing is more important for our students' success than the people who teach them and lead their schools." So now please join me first in welcoming Governor Branstad to the stage.
Thank you, Carmel Martin, for that very nice introduction. It's an honor to be here with Governor Jack Markell to help launch this Teach Strong campaign and to tell you about Iowa's initiative to transform the teaching profession. In Iowa, we share the conviction that all students deserve to be taught by great teachers. That's why Iowa is establishing the most extensive teacher leadership system in the nation with two main goals. First, to better utilize teacher expertise to improve instruction and raise student achievement. And second, to attract and retain more highly qualified, effective teachers. That includes rewarding top teachers with higher pay for taking on more responsibility in leadership roles such as instructional coaches and mentors. We launched Iowa's teacher leadership system last school year with 39 school districts that enroll 1/3 of Iowa's 481,000 public school students. 76 school districts with another third of the enrollment came on board this school year. All remaining districts have applied to participate in the 2016-17 school year so that all of Iowa's 336 school districts should have teacher leadership systems beginning in 2016-17. When fully implemented, about 25% of Iowa teachers will be in leadership roles across the state. Previously, some districts had created some teacher leadership roles, but nothing that was nearly this far-reaching. We expect Iowa's new teacher leadership and compensation system to be the driving force that makes reforms successful. Iowa's teacher leadership system has been in place just over a year, but based on what I've seen so far, it is revolutionizing what's happening in classrooms across Iowa. I just finished a teacher leadership listening tour, including a 90-minute visit to the Dubuque School District, which is in year 2 in the teacher leadership system. Before, the district had about 20 to 25 teachers in teacher leadership roles. Today, it has 215. Here's how Jenny Tigges, who is a high school math content leader and a math teacher, described the change. Quote, People have really felt the environment now supports them. They really feel like they have a voice. The communication is really going both directions now. The cost of the teacher leadership and compensation system will be $150 million annually after it's fully phased in 2016-17. This investment will be instrumental in giving Iowa students a truly world-class education. It grew out of a promise that I made to restore Iowa schools to best in the nation when I came back after a 12-year sabbatical to run for governor in 2010. Iowa has a proud education tradition, but we became dangerously complacent. Iowa was a top performer on national test scores back in the 1990s. I served as governor for 4 terms from 83 to 99 when our ranking on 4th grade reading and 8th grade math was strong, but it had slipped a little bit by 1999. No one was alarmed, including me. While serving as the president of Des Moines University Medical School, after leaving office, I realized that Iowa was in trouble. By 2009, Iowa had dropped to middle of the pack in 8th grade math and 4th grade reading. Meanwhile, other states that adopted statewide reforms passed us by, while Iowa was stuck with our local control system. In 2008, Iowa was among the last to adopt state academic standards, which did not, and they were not to be fully implemented until last school year. Since great teachers are the most important influence to learning inside our schools, my administration knew it would be a critical part of how we would better support the demanding work of teachers, that we must do more to prepare students to succeed in this knowledge-based economy, and having a great teacher is critically important for that. It is no longer realistic to expect one principal to provide all the instructional leadership in a school building. That led to Iowa's teacher leadership and compensation system becoming the centerpiece of our ambitious education blueprint, which was announced in October of 2011. But before that, we held a major education summit, headlined by Secretary of Education Arne Duncan in July of 2011. We held roundtables with educators, business leaders, parents, and students, and afterwards, we held dozens of town hall meetings to explain our strategy for creating world-class schools and why Iowans needed to work together with a sense of urgency. Our idea for a teacher leadership system got literally no traction through the fall of 2011, despite all of this hard work. So in February 2012, we convened a 25-member task force to make recommendations on how Iowa should establish a teacher leadership system. That generated a proposal that the 2013 Iowa legislature passed, and I have a split legislature. Democratic control of the Senate, Republican control of the House. I'm proud to say this proposal gained strong bipartisan support after significant negotiations. That brings us to where we are today. Participating in Iowa's teacher leadership and compensation system is optional for school districts, but the incentives are significant. It promotes collaboration among colleagues, including daily professional development in the classroom that connects directly to what students are learning. It provides $312.68 per pupil. That money can be used for stipends for teacher leaders, hiring teachers to replace those that are taking on full-time leadership roles, and for professional development that enhances the teacher leadership system. We're also spending $2.6 million this school year to help teacher leaders and principals develop the skills they need to be successful in their new roles. Each school district designs its own teacher leadership plan aligned with the 5 pillars of the statewide system, such as creating differentiated, multiple meaningful leadership roles, but the overall approach is the same. Teacher leaders help colleagues analyze student data and fine-tune instructional strategies, as well as coach and co-teach. Later this month, the Iowa Department of Education will issue a report on the first year of the teacher leadership and compensation system. But there are 3 things we already have learned from the 39 school districts that were involved last year. Number 1, they would not go back. Teachers overwhelmingly like the embedded professional development and the other increased opportunities to collaborate rather than being isolated in their classrooms. Principals say they can accomplish much more. In fact, one of the principals in Dubuque, Mark Burns, noted that before Iowa's teacher leadership system was in place, change would seem like decades, and that is not the case in Dubuque anymore. Number 2, it's hard work, but it's worth it. Digging into the formative assessment data to individualize instruction takes time. Figuring how to connect the local curriculum to state academic standards is a complex process. Yet educators say they now have the time to do the work. It is no longer the case that they have to wait for professional development that may be 3 months down the road. Number 3, all teachers need to participate. So far, school districts typically have left it up to the teachers to decide whether they want to work with teacher leaders. Most teachers have been receptive, but some haven't. How to better support all teachers and have all teachers accountable to each other for student academic progress is a challenge. I'm confident that we will meet that challenge. Most important, I'm confident that we will raise student achievement as a result. It may take 3 or 5 years to get the results that we want, but I'm confident that Iowa will again be a national leader known for giving our students a globally competitive education. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Wonderful to be with you, and I want to thank Carmel for the introduction and for inviting me here. I want to thank everybody from CAP. Always good to be with Governor Branstad, a great governor, about to set the record for the longest-serving governor in U.S. history. Congratulations, Governor Branstad. Also want to thank all of the educators in the room and some terrific national partners in this effort, including both the National Education Association, which works in Delaware, the American Federation of Teachers, and I'm happy to see a number of groups here that we have worked with in Delaware and that are national leaders in this effort. That includes the Council on Chief State School Officers, the Education Trust, Teach for America, as well as Third Way. And at a time when there is a lot of angst around the country around educational efforts, I think it is especially encouraging to see an event like this and to have the chance to participate at an event like this, where there is so much support coming from so many different perspectives around the issue of supporting our teachers and making sure that they have the tools that they need to be successful. And it's great to see bipartisan support. And it is certainly my experience in Delaware that building bipartisan support in education can yield strong results. And nowhere is it more important that we make progress as a nation than with the agenda that this initiative really embodies. And so what I want to do in the few minutes I have here is to walk through some of the examples of where we have used or are using the approach in Delaware and where it is working. And the first is around educator preparation programs. You know, strengthening the teacher profession starts, in our view, with strengthening the educator preparation programs themselves. So 2 years ago, we passed legislation in Delaware to do just that. And most significantly, the legislation raised the bar for entering the teaching profession in the first place by setting some statewide program admission requirements around GPA, around class percentile, and the like. It also required students to pass a content exam and a performance assessment before receiving a license to teach. We've also improved the quality of the teacher training itself by requiring that the student teaching experience is really interspersed throughout an entire year. And as I have been out in schools and seeing this in action, it has been very powerful. And the feedback both from the student teachers and from the mentor teachers has been really, really positive. We've also required ongoing evaluation of educator preparation students, and also literacy and math instruction for prospective elementary teachers. We're also better holding accountable our educator preparation programs by collecting the data on program effectiveness. That includes how are their graduates doing as teachers. And we're also creating scorecards on each of Delaware's educator preparation programs. And this legislation passed with bipartisan support in our legislature and with the support of a broad coalition of stakeholders, including our statewide teachers union. So that's the first area. The second is around supporting teachers in the classroom. And to set them up for success, which is extraordinarily important, we believe that we need to give them the tools that they need to do the ever more challenging job that's expected of them. And so in Delaware, we've emphasized making the following available to teachers. One is data. And we've got what we believe is one of the best, if not the best, data systems in the country, and it's data that they need to understand student strengths and also the data they need to support struggling students. What we call our Education Insight Portal, it's a statewide portal, shows our teachers everything that they need to know about each student's courses, test results, attendance, so on and so forth for the entire educational career of the students. That's one. Secondly, significant support around the implementation of Common Core, and we are a state that's still willing to call it Common Core. Part of that support includes what we call Common Ground for the Common Core, and this is it's a voluntary statewide initiative. One of the most exciting events I get to do every year is I go to Dover, where about 350 or 400 teachers get together and they share with each other lessons, Common Core lessons that they have developed. We've also got a group of teacher leaders from across the state who are coaching, training, and developing materials for their peers. We also have meaningful professional development opportunities. And one of the things that we hear most often from teachers is that the existing professional development is just not nearly as effective as it ought to be. Too often it's sort of delivered in a setting like this, where the expert is standing up here talking at all of the educators. And what the teachers have told us is that the best professional development for them is when they have an opportunity to collaborate with their peers about the instructional techniques and the needs of specific students. So as part of Race to the Top, when we won Race to the Top, we made it possible for every teacher in the state to spend up to 90 minutes a week with 5 of their peers. And they sit with each other at tables just like the ones you're sitting at, and they spend their time really drilling into the data about how their students are doing. And many of the teachers tell me it's some of the most powerful professional development that they've ever had an opportunity to participate with. We also focus on sending them students who are more prepared in the first place, and we have made an enormous investment in early childhood education. We have, in just the last 5 years, if you think about low-income children, the low-income children who are enrolled in the highest quality early childhood centers, we've increased in 5 years from 5% to 58%. And we think this is a game changer for these kids. And it also, obviously, it makes it a lot easier for the teachers when they're helping students who are coming to kindergarten who were prepared. And we've also developed, really following on the model, I think, of Maryland, of an early learner survey, giving our kindergarten teachers a better opportunity to engage with students either before they get to school in the first place or in the early months, and really an opportunity to forge strong relationships with their families as well. Another piece, and Governor Branstad spent a good chunk of his address talking about it, we certainly look forward to learning more about the progress that you're making in Iowa, is around teacher compensation reform. And so we have very much recognized that the way that we compensate teachers, I would say, frankly, is antiquated and really does not recognize educators as the professionals that they are and that we all want them to be. And we too often have not given them the opportunities to make more money while advancing their careers in the classroom. So we've embarked on a mission to modernize our educator compensation system. And this modernization would offer educators meaningful career pathways like the kind that Governor Branstad talked about, higher starting salaries. Unfortunately, we have relatively low starting salaries compared to surrounding districts in nearby states, and teacher leadership opportunities that give educators the opportunities to advance their careers and to support their peers while remaining in the classroom. You know, too often I talk to great teachers who tell me they would love to stay in the classroom, but they feel like the only opportunity they have to make more money is to become an assistant principal. And that doesn't make sense for anybody. And so this is why we're putting a lot of energy into this, and we've had a lot of collaboration in trying to make this happen. Our union leaders, administrators, our State Board of Education, state legislators have been our partners in this work. And all of us working together have developed a plan that was released in June, and now we're working with a team of educators to really fine-tune the specifics of teacher leadership roles to make sure that they add value in the classroom, and we hope to see the first pilots next fall. So we know, so that's really the sort of the gist of the work we're doing. But we know that meaningful change comes when teachers are given the preparation, the support, and the opportunities to perform well, and when we attract the best and the brightest to our classroom. And we have got to get beyond that as just rhetoric, and we have to make sure it really means something. And that is really the focus of our work. Our experience is that teachers are not opposed to higher standards. They're not opposed to better assessments, but we need to set them up for success, and we have to make sure that it's done well. And so we are grateful for all of the collaboration that we've received, including from a number of groups represented in this room. And as I said at the beginning, at a time when there is so much controversy around education efforts in the country, I am so encouraged that this is in particular an area that so many different people can get behind and work together. So thanks for having me today.
Both governors are going to take some questions from the audience, but I was just going to kick it off first. Thank you both for those terrific remarks and for all the work that you're doing to modernize the teaching profession. I guess one of the things that I wanted to touch you a little bit about is, as we've been working on this project, some folks have said to us, well, you want to raise the bar for getting into the profession, as you described, Governor Markell in Delaware, at the same time that we do have this perfect storm with teacher shortage potential stemming from baby boomer retirements, but also right now we have shortages in some areas, math, science, high poverty schools often have trouble recruiting into the profession. So just wonder if each of you could speak to that tension and how you're dealing with that in your state with your work.
Sure. Well, raising the bar really means treating teachers as the professionals that we know they are and that we need them to be and that society really expects. And so, in our case, part of it certainly is compensation. And I mentioned increasing starting salaries to make it more attractive to get into the field in the first place. Part of it is the career advancement, and that is a reflection both in terms of compensation, so that teachers who take on a role mentoring other teachers, as Governor Branstad said, and some additional roles will stay in the classroom rather than just going into administration. And also, I mean, letting them know that they will have the time to collaborate with their peers. I mean, so much of it, when we talk to teachers who are, let's say want to get out of teaching, very often it's because they feel like their voice doesn't matter. And so a lot of it obviously comes down to the principals who are the school leaders who are in our schools, and whether they are creating an environment where teachers feel valued, where their voice matters. And so, it's a lot more than just, I think the compensation piece is really important, but a lot of it is a cultural piece, which is so dependent upon the leader in the school. And, for the most, very heavily, I think if you show us a great school, we're going to show you a great school leader.
Well, I agree with everything that Governor Markell has said. I would say that, and I'm impressed with what he has initiated in terms of teacher preparation in Delaware, and I think it's a real challenge. But I think if you make the teaching profession more attractive and you show respect and appreciation for the important role that teachers are playing, and also you provide both a better compensation system and career opportunities, I think you can raise the bar and attract people, because then all of a sudden it's cool, it's neat, it's good to be a teacher, and you feel respected and appreciated. I like to point out that I had an 8th grade U.S. history teacher named Lyra Seawick. I was a mediocre student before I had her, but she so impressed and inspired me that I decided I want to go into a career of public service. And I've acknowledged throughout my entire career, it was Lyra Seawick, and I had another teacher named Fred Smith who taught Iowa history and civics, and those two teachers really have affected me my entire life. So I think it's important that teachers really make an impact. And I think just about every one of us can probably think of a teacher that played an important role in our life. And we need to tell that story, and we need to encourage and inspire the next generation of leaders to choose the teaching profession as well.
I think that's exactly right. And I think, so often the discussion about education is up at the policy level. And what we know is that what really happens is the magic in every classroom. That's right. And I think it's incumbent upon people like us to make sure that story gets out. I think everybody can relate, almost everybody can relate to having a great teacher. But also I think it's important to recognize, there are those who say, well, teachers teach from 9 till 3, but we know that educators put in so much more time than that. And I think it's important that we make sure we get the word out to everybody else about that as well.
That's great. So part of the campaign is designed to tackle the profession in really a comprehensive way and provide teachers with the supports that they need to be successful, but also make some tough changes in terms of the way the systems around teaching work. And that, although teacher reform initiatives are not new, sort of that more holistic approach is something that I don't think we've really done, certainly not at the national level. What advice do you have in terms of how, from a political perspective and a policy perspective, how to really garner support for some tough changes, but also new investments in the profession based on your experience in both of your states?
Well, it's a tough task. And, we brought Arne Duncan and former Governor Hunt from North Carolina and a number of other people to our summit. And we had a summit to say, realistically, we're not where we used to be in terms of Iowa's rank in student achievement. And we need to change that. We need to get there, and we need to develop a strategy to get there. But that was in 2011, and it wasn't until 2013 that we were able to get the bipartisan consensus to begin this process. And now it's being phased in over a 3-year period. So it takes some patience and perseverance, and you need to constantly be communicating with people, especially people in the education profession, so that they can see that you're listening to them. I've heard the same things about professional development. I think a lot of teachers feel is really very bad. It's not effective. It doesn't really meet their needs. But having more collaboration and opportunity to interact with their colleagues or getting feedback from other teachers that are coaches, or for the new teacher to have a mentor there to help them when they get started. My daughter's a third grade teacher, and now in her school, which is Waukee, they have mentors. She started teaching, probably 10 years ago, and they didn't have that. And she said, wow, what a much better situation. We lose a lot of talented, good teachers in the early years because they don't get the support, the mentorship, and the encouragement they need.
I think the key is to start by listening to each other. And when we put together our Race to the Top plan originally back in 2009, early 2010, our then Secretary of Education brought together a very diverse coalition of stakeholders, starting with educators and administrators, but including the business community, parents, the disability community, and others. And our Race to the Top plan came out of those conversations. More recently, a coalition came together in Delaware called Student Success 2025, and literally had thousands of people at the table. And it takes time, because we have to have we have to take the time to listen to each other. But out of that, you then can paint a picture. And I think it's really important that you do have, that you're able to paint a picture of here's where we are, here's the necessity for change, here's what's happening around the world, and here's how we're going to address it in our state. And it needs to be holistic. And so in our case, it really does start with a significant investment at early childhood. It continues through K-12 around higher expectations, around a better data system, around the kind of teacher preparation issues that are very much the focus of this conversation, and then on through college access. And I think if you take the time to hear each other's perspectives, to explain where we are in the context of a changing global economy and the kinds of improvements that are going on in other states and the necessity for change, and then you wrap that up into not just a vision, but an actionable vision that people can rally behind, I think you've got a much better chance. But I do think, having people sit at the same table who normally don't talk to each other is incredibly important, because we've all got a stake in this.
Yeah, well, hopefully the rest of the country can learn from the groundwork that you have laid in your both of your states. I'm going to give the folks from the audience a chance to ask questions. If you raise your hand, and then we have a mic. Oh, you've got the mic? Great.
Good morning. My name is Steve Wojciechowicz, and I'm with Deans for Impact, which is one of the partners in the T-Strong campaign. And my question for you this morning regards turning a state agenda into a national or a cross-state agenda. You've described in depth the significant investments you've had to make in time, in money, in stakeholder engagement. How can we leverage your work and the work of this campaign to get other states to make similar investments and to really make this into a national agenda? Thank you.
So, two things. First of all, I think there are some natural places for collaboration. We are one of a bunch of smarter, balanced states aligned to the Common Core. And to the extent that we can leverage work that's going on across the country in terms of the investment in better assessments, I think that's a place where we can be more effective with our spending and target it where we want to spend it. So that's one. To the broader question of how you turn, one state's agenda into a national agenda, I think in the end, success wins. And so, taking as an example, Massachusetts, 20, 25 years ago, before anybody was really talking about higher standards, Massachusetts raised their standards. Well, here we are. We've got a big focus over the last 6 years on raising standards. And as I think Governor Branstad said quite right, the changes may not come tomorrow. We're all impatient, and it may take a few years. But all the more reason to start today. And I do think, one of the reasons that I, get a lot out of these kinds of conversations is because, although we are proud of the work we're doing, we also don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And so when we see other states and other countries that are doing really well, then we say, well, we better learn something from them. But I think in the end, it's, we all want to be successful, and we look to others that have been successful, and we say, how do we improve?
The National Governors Association is a great opportunity for the governors to learn from each other. And I chaired the National Governors a long time ago when we had the Education Summit at Charlottesville. That led to the whole movement to standards and assessments. I was really disappointed. My state was one of the last to actually do it because we were so complacent and stuck in our old ways of, well, we're a local controlled state and it's always worked for us. It's the old, it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, we've now learned that we need to get serious about changing and adapting and being prepared for the future. But I think we can always learn from each other. What Governor Markell has already done in teacher preparation, we need to do in Iowa. And I'm looking at what Massachusetts has done. And my education advisor, who's with me here today, Linda Fandel, she, in her previous job with the Des Moines Register, went all over the world looking at the countries that are doing the best in students in terms of achievement. And how can we learn from those experiences? So we just have to be open to that. And there are some places like Education Commission of the States, National Governors Association. I think this movement, the more we can get the information out and share best practices and what's worked in some place, hopefully we can get others to copy it. Well, then what governors like to do, they go back and introduce it in their state, and everybody thinks it's a brand new idea. No, they've just copied it from somebody else, but the people in their state don't know that. So that's the benefit of being the leader, is you can get a great idea from somebody else, and then you get credit for it in your own state.
Sure.
That's great. Any other questions? Probably have time for one more.
Thanks. Hi, Kristen Van Hook with the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching, and we're doing a little bit of work in Iowa, and I know STEM has been a big focus in Iowa, and a number of the districts are looking to find a way to use their teacher leadership initiatives to connect then with STEM. And I wondered if you wanted to maybe talk a little bit about how you see the importance of STEM connecting with what you're doing on teacher leadership.
Well, great question, and I wish my lieutenant governor were here to answer that, because Kim Reynolds is my lieutenant governor. We're really a team. We're elected as a team. We work closely together. And when I signed an executive order establishing the Governor's STEM Council, I made her co-chair of it. And she has really led that effort. We've gotten great bipartisan support, wonderful buy-in. The number of students taking STEM courses has gone up. I was on a trade mission recently with the Dean of the College of Engineering at the University of Iowa, Dean Scranton. He told me their enrollment was up 50%, and he attributed that to the focus on STEM and how students are much more interested thanks to that. So we have, our STEM program involves educators at all levels, from elementary, middle, high school, community colleges, the state universities and the private colleges. The business community is very actively engaged. The co-chairman now is Chris Nelson, who is the CEO of Kemin Industries. It's a company that has they have operations in every continent except South Antarctica. By the way, he's on a trip to Antarctica right now. I don't know I don't know how they're going to put something there, but I can tell you that having the business community and the education community and the lieutenant governor and a business person leading that has just really worked effectively in our state, and we're trying to make sure that it is integrated with our teacher leadership and compensation system as well. And Linda can maybe give you more information of how that's working in Iowa, but I'm very excited about that, and I think STEM is one of our greatest successes, and that's where a lot of the really best paying jobs of the future are going to be, in those STEM fields.
That's exactly the right model, and it is just, and I think the integration of the business community with our educators. Our STEM Council is co-chaired by the STEM director for one of our school districts and a senior executive at one of our science employers. and their ability to connect and to figure out together how to advance this agenda. Because when I speak to businesses about we live in a world where employers have more choices than they have ever had before about where to hire. There are 3 billion people in the world looking for jobs, and there are 1.2 billion jobs available. So it's no exaggeration to say that we are in a global war for jobs. And what that really means is we're in a global war for talent, because the jobs are going to go where the talent is. And when I talk to businesses about what we can do to facilitate their success, 9 times out of 10, their first answer has to do with having access to a skilled workforce. And so we just had a couple weeks ago, JP Morgan Chase announced they're going to add 1,800 primarily technology jobs in Delaware. And as I tried, to explain to people, this is a great announcement, not just for those jobs, but it's a reflection that this really important, successful company views our state as a place that is really ready for the new economy. And so we are also very excited about the opportunities available to students with those kinds of STEM skills. And we're really grateful to the educators and to others, including the business community, who are working together to make sure those students have those skills.
That's great. I think we do have time for one more if anybody has any additional questions. Don't be shy. I guess I'll jump in if the audience doesn't have one, and just to ask the governors, in selling these changes and these investments in each of your respective states, have you found the need to have to overcome some stereotypes about teaching? For example, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we kind of set up the system as if we had a 19th century economy instead of a 21st century economy. So there's this perception that teaching is a job where you only work 9 to 3 and you get summers off, so you don't really need to pay people any more than we're already paying them. Has that been a factor in each of your states? And if so, how have you sort of overcome those stereotypes or myths about teaching?
Well, first of all, I think there's great resistance to change. People fear change. They feel comfortable the way things are. And being from an agricultural state, I think it's even more that way. It's kind of that ain't broke, don't fix it attitude. And so part of it is just convincing people that, they had for so long, Iowa led the nation in literacy, and we had such high achievement that they were just very complacent. So the lieutenant governor and I spent about 2 years trying to convince people that it's not that way anymore. Massachusetts is now leading the country, and we better get with it. We finally have state standards, but now we also need to revitalize the teaching profession. We all remember great teachers we had, but, and a lot of them were women. And they now have the opportunity to be doctors and lawyers and veterinarians and in a whole lot of other fields. And so we used to have great, talented people that went into teaching, and today we do have a lot of great, talented teachers, but we need a lot more. And every student deserves to have a great teacher in their classroom, and there needs to be support and collaboration so that they feel appreciated and listened to and want to really stay in the profession, and so we don't lose some of our best teachers as we have in those first 5 years.
This is really difficult work, and it's difficult in part because there has been so much that's been expected of our educators. There have been so many changes over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I think, you talk to a lot of educators who have been around a while, and they'll tell you they've seen new ideas come and they've seen new ideas go. And so I think there is it's hard to have some of these conversations, which is why what I said earlier about making sure that you start with listening well is really important. And as it comes to the changes that we're working on educator compensation, we laid out a very high vision at the beginning, this idea of higher starting salaries and then a meaningful career ladder so that great teachers who wanted to stay in the classroom would stay in the classroom. I mean, that, you would say, probably makes pretty good sense. But when we started to get into some of the details, it's been a very iterative process. And I'd say our proposals have gotten a lot stronger over time because we've spent the time, led by Lindsay O'Mara, my education advisor, really listening to what the educators have to say. And we're not quite as far along as Governor Branstad is. We hope that we're going to get there. But we've taken the time to listen. We've taken the time to improve our proposals, to go back and tweak them here and tweak them there. But I think people feel overloaded for a lot of reasons, and I think we have to understand that when we go in. And that's true at the educator preparation program level. It's true at the principal level, the educator level. There's been a lot, and I think we need to be really reflective of that as we talk about some of these new ideas.
Well, we look forward to holding up your work as an example for the nation, and really thank you for your leadership in this area, and thank you for joining us today. I know you both have states to run, so we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. And if you could all join me in thanking both of the governors. And now I'd like to invite our panel up to the stage. We're just going to add a couple chairs here. And as soon as we've got some chairs, they'll come up and join us. But first, I'll just introduce the moderator for today's discussion, who's Amanda Ripley, an investigative journalist for Time, The Atlantic, and other magazines. She's the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Smartest Kids in the World and How They Got That Way. She's visited schools on 4 continents and interviewed hundreds of kids, teachers, and parents. We're very lucky to have her moderating a terrific panel, and I think we're ready for them to come up. So please join me in welcoming Amanda and the panel.
Good morning. I don't know if you all have had a chance to look at the list of organizations that have all partnered on the Teach Strong campaign. Go ahead and take a seat. But if you have,
Too long for there.
you may find it unusual. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not every day that there's an event like this where you have Teach for America and AFT and NEA and TNTP and various other acronyms all on the same team. In fact, when I got here and I saw all the metal detectors out front, I was like, oh no, this is going to be bad. But then I realized it wasn't for us. So, phew.
Well, maybe.
Phew, not yet. But at the same time, that unity raises a question, right? Which is this for real? Like, if you all can agree on these 9 principles, does that mean there's nothing really here? Is this just rhetoric? So that's something we're going to try to delve into a little bit in this conversation. What I'd like to do is to introduce each panelist with a question so we can integrate it into the conversation, and then we're going to open it up for questions from all of you. Do we have any current or former teachers in the room today? Oh, that's awesome. That's great. That's great. And on the panel, which is nice. Obviously, an effort to elevate and modernize the teaching profession should start by listening to teachers. So I want to start our conversation with Mr. Bobby Miles, who is a rock star science teacher from Charlotte, North Carolina, where he teaches at Ranson IB Middle School. And you've been there for, how long have you been teaching?
9 years.
9 years, okay. So it almost didn't happen.
Nope.
And I'd like you to talk a little bit about why in high school you didn't initially think you would go into teaching.
Okay. So growing up, I did have a desire to become a school teacher. After many conversations with my peers and learning the different occupations that they wanted to become doctors and lawyers, I quickly changed my mind because I knew I couldn't compete with the respect that those occupations got as being a classroom teacher. So I decided to go into undergrad pre-med to become a pediatrician. So I tried to marry the two, working with kids and still getting the same respect that they would get. But after an internship at Duke University, I was immediately turned off from the occupation of medicine. And I guess you can say I came back to my first true love, which is teaching. So that's my story.
So the question is, how can we make teaching more more attractive, more cool, as I believe one of the governors said, more neat. How can we make it something that high school kids want to be a part of, right? And that's one of the challenges that the Teach Strong campaign is trying to acknowledge. A couple of years ago, I met a woman from Finland who was studying to be a teacher in Finland in one of their education colleges. And she was on a semester abroad to the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And so I thought this was fascinating. So I took her to the first bar I could find, and I said, tell me everything. What's the difference? Is it more hands-on? Are the classes more rigorous? What's the difference between teacher college in Finland and teacher college in the United States? And she said, actually, the biggest difference is not in school, it's at parties. And I said, and she was she was like these little glasses and her little leather jacket. She was like very Finnish, just to stereotype wildly. And she was very sweet. She was 23. And I said, so by parties, what do you mean? And she said, when I go, I wouldn't have expected it. I didn't even realize it was happening, but when I go to parties or I meet someone in my apartment complex here in Kansas City and they ask me what I'm studying and I say education, there's something that happens. Their eyes kind of fog over and they don't ask follow-up questions. They move on to the weather or something else. And she said she hadn't realized how important that was to her in Finland, to her identity. Because when she would go to parties at her university in Finland, which admitted 10% of applicants to the education college as opposed to 2/3, which is what the University of Missouri, Kansas City does. When she would go to parties in Finland and say, I'm studying to be a teacher, their eyes would light up and they would say, well, what kind of teacher? And she would say, I'm going to be a PE teacher, which is what she was going to be. It was very serious and people would get excited. They would ask her follow-up questions. So that is what we're going for, right, is to shift that. Did you notice differences when you told people you were pre-med at parties and then later you went to parties and told them you were a teacher? Did you notice a difference?
I did. When I started teaching, I did see a little change in everybody's attitudes towards education, because where I come from, nobody was going to be teachers. Everybody wanted to be doctors and lawyers. So I guess I was that apple that was different. So everybody wanted to know how that was going and why I decided to do that and not become a doctor, because I was so, I was great at science and I became a doctor easily, but they wanted to know why I decided to choose education and not become that doctor that I wanted to do when I was growing up.
Interesting, okay. So now we've talked about the sort of individual level impressions and how that changes over time. I want to talk about the macro situation, and there's nobody better to speak to this than Congressman Miller, who was in Congress for 40 years fighting for education equity. You have seen lots of campaigns come and go, some with hashtags, some without. Some succeed, most do not. Can you help us understand why hasn't a serious national initiative to elevate and modernize the teaching profession ever worked? What are the stumbling blocks that recur?
Well, I think probably education for most of America's history and even today is very granular. So the idea of top-down dramatic changes are very hard to pull off, and in my 40 years I never saw one pulled off. There's been a lot of directives and demands made. That doesn't seem to work very well and probably shouldn't work very well. But if you think about it, this is a very locally controlled system. It's a system that almost all Americans have grown up in as a local system, where you knew the teacher, you knew the superintendent, the principal. They were important parts of your family life in one fashion or another, either because you were in trouble or because you were excelling, however you encountered them. And so demands for change just to come do this is met with a bunch of people who are already heavily invested in the existing system. And as much as we can criticize it, there are people there that think this is doing pretty well, and they don't really want to change. And there's always the question then, if you're going to have Bobby teach you or work with other teachers, is he going to get paid more? Is it going to come out of our budget? Is it going to be diminished in some way or another? So there's a huge political conversation going on back and forth, and so we've been stuck in this model. God knows I'm the author of No Child Left Behind, along with others. So that was one model to try it. It was, it hasn't really worked in the sense of changing the profession. It's worked in the sense of closing the achievement gap and graduation rates and a number of other things like that, but not what we really want as a nation in terms of high-performing students, across the nation. So this is an effort. You got a very mixed group here, but what we do see is we see an awful lot of models for success. The question is, can you grow them? Can they become district-wide? Can they become statewide? Can they become county-wide? However you want to measure them. But I don't think you're not going to end up, you just heard two governors with a little different approaches, but again, very local, trying to see whether or not they can go viral even in the districts, and hopefully in their state. They can go viral with this, with the change and what we know, how we can help teachers and what teachers know they need. But that's probably not a conversation well suited for the Congress of the United States.
Do you think there is any appetite? I mean, some of the key elements of these proposals cost money, more time for teachers, more money for teachers. Do you see any world in which American taxpayers are seriously ready to make that investment? Or is it, like you said, going to really depend on the district and the state?
I think if they believe they're going to get the outcomes, yes, they would do that. And again, it's not about the American taxpayers, it's about the taxpayers in Contra Costa County and the Mount Diablo School District, whether they'll make that decision. And the answer is they probably will, because they want the best for their child. And if they're convinced, and that's part of the political process, that this change, whether it's the change to Common Core or whether it's the change to introducing AP courses or a foreign language course in elementary school, whatever these changes are, do they buy into them? I mean, I think that's the question. But again, change, as you heard earlier, a lot of people don't like change, and there's an immediate. We've been through so many cycles on reform and change and all of that. The people are pretty jaded in the sense, and certainly personnel is, because it's fits and starts. I mean, the question is, do you really want, is a nation prepared, or districts prepared, or even states, to understand what's at stake, and are you prepared to, in fact, really do this in a first-class fashion, or are you going to try to do it on the cheap again? Are you going to buy teachers' time? Are you going to buy their expertise? Are you going to get good data? Are you going to spend the time to analyze it? Are you going to see what it tells you and then understand you may have to make some changes as a result of this that will benefit the children, that will benefit probably the use of teachers' times? Are you going to have that much courage over a sustained period of time? Because you can't do that in 1 year, 6 months, because again, it involves a lot of people deciding that they're going to put a chip on the table and see if they want to change this game.
Peggy Birkins is the president and CEO of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Just to continue the analogy we've been making, could you tell us what percentage of American teachers are nationally board certified?
Well, currently only about 3% of the nation's teachers are nationally board certified.
And what about doctors?
80%.
Okay.
In contrast. And you think about that, and you can't think about that as, wow, 80% are certified, so it must be easy for doctors to get certified. That is not the case. Even though they pass at a rate of 90%, what it's telling us is that along the way, when you enter the field of medicine, there's an expectation that you will become board certified, and that expectation comes along with support systems that go along with that in a very staged, succinct way, that at the end of your residency and that time that you spend with others and collaborating, that you're being prepared to sit for your board certifications. So there's a very big difference in the way we do that in teaching versus the way we do it in medicine. There's a clear path. Most people enter the teaching profession, and nobody says there's an expectation that you become an accomplished teacher. So the continuum that we continually talk about here and among the group of organizations that are part of Teach Strong, thinking about how do we change the culture and the mindset of teachers who are entering the field initially to say, my goal is to become a teacher who is accomplished. and then become a teacher leader. You can't just say that. You have to do that. You have to have support systems along the way. They have to understand, from the National Board perspective, the 5 core propositions, the architecture of accomplished teaching. How do I do that in ways that are inclusive, in ways that give us the insight into to areas that are different from what we would normally experience? There are some rural areas, there are some high-need schools, and that we must have the ability to get accomplished teachers into those schools. And there's a way to do that, and a lot of the research about National Board tells us cohorts of teachers who are supported. It's embedded, personalized professional development that speaks to their needs. And we've talked about professional development, we've talked about looking at the data, but we have to do something else in the process, and that is form relationships. And if we do not form relationships in which people trust each other, or relationships for teachers that they understand and trust their students, we can't change the culture. We can't make that system change that's absolutely necessary for everyone in this profession to say, we all have the same goal. And that goal is to put an accomplished teacher in front of every child in this country.
We've got we've got multiple problems, but 2 problems that we've got are that teaching is not prestigious enough and it's not diverse enough. Are those problems at odds? Some people will say, well, if you raise the bar to get into education college, like other countries have done, you're going to end up with an even whiter, more homogeneous teaching force. What do you think, as someone who represents elite teachers already, can you have prestige, selectivity, and diversity?
I'm here.
True.
Word.
So
That's racist.
that is telling you immediately. One of the things that we know is that within communities, rural areas, high-need schools where you have populations of low SES, that poverty and race aren't mutually, exclusive or connected necessarily all the time. So what we have to do when we talk about, teachers of color or people of color who are part of an organization that, when I first became board certified, I looked around and I didn't see anyone who looked like me. So that was the first challenge. Guess what I'm going to do? And then secondly, we think about ways in which we elevate each other and be responsible. And it's something so simple as, how do we hold each of us in this field responsible for the work that we do on a daily basis that affect children and impact their learning? So if you're in the classroom next to me and I'm board certified, I'm coming over to chat and help. And we have to get that mindset. We are not adversaries. We're not at odds with each other. We know it is so important, and a lot of organizations have come to the conclusion that the teacher is the most important person in the room. So when we talk about teachers of color in this world, we have to go, it's like the Willie Sutton moment. I have to go, people say, well, why do you rob banks? Well, that's where the money is. So we need to go to where teachers of color are and put support systems in place so that you blossom and become an accomplished teacher over time.
Right, and the few examples we have of states and preparation programs that have actually gotten serious about getting more selective and rigorous, they didn't just do that and walk away.
No.
And they also aggressively recruited minorities and low-income first-generation college students. And what you saw is that both went up,
Yes.
right? And you saw that in New York, you see that with Teach for America, you see that with other places. Mary Catherine Ricker, I would like to ask you, as the Executive Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers and a longtime teacher, I would like to ask you about pay, this issue of teacher pay. Sometimes people say, well, look, teachers don't get into this profession to make money. Right. So why have a huge fight over the most expensive conceivable reform you could come up with, which is to raise teachers' salaries? Why do that when that's not what motivates teachers?
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you asking, and a couple different answers to that. First of all, right, teachers, to be clear, we don't go into teaching to become rich. We actually do expect to have the sort of wage that allows us to own a home in the community in which we work.
Important distinction.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it is not lost on me, the confluence of events today. We are launching Teach Strong, this opportunity to reframe the profession and recognize the professionalism of teaching. At the same time, there's a national Fight for 15 events happening across the country. There is a real effort to suppress the recognition of the dignity of all work. And we need to be that counterbalance to that effort. There is dignity in all work. All people deserve to earn the sort of wage that allows them to own a home in the community in which they work and send their children to higher education if needed, to make ends meet. And so while as the teacher who is the union leader right now, I will get attention from people by talking about wages and benefits. And then since I have your attention, I will hold it, just like I did when I was negotiating contracts in St. Paul, to say, yes, this contract is historically the document we use to recognize the worth of our professionals, and we are going to pay attention to those wages and benefits. And since I have you here at the negotiating table, I am going to make sure, I'm going to use the success of negotiating those wages and benefits and the history behind that to also negotiate professional teaching standards. I mean, in my time when I was president of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers, I negotiated variations of all 9 of these principles. And they were permissive, and that's one of the things. And so at my bargaining table, they were permissive under state law. They weren't mandatory subjects of negotiating. And so I'll take your attention around pay and benefits, and I will absolutely raise you the opportunity to have a voice as a professional around professional working conditions and the professional framing of teaching as well. And we have locals across the country doing that, both in AFT and NEA.
You know, CAP put out a paper earlier this year about 10 districts that have actually significantly increased teacher pay, including the one that you're sitting in, which pays teachers more than pretty much any district in the country. You can now make $125,000 in 10 years of teaching if you teach at a high-needs school. And so this is a serious change in the culture and the respect of the profession. Often, in all those cases, I think, in all those districts, they did that not by giving everyone a raise, but by differentiating compensation, whether you're working in a high-needs school, whether you were evaluated to be highly effective. These are controversial things that often union leaders have fought against, that kind of differentiation. So by being here today, are you saying that the unions and you are more willing to differentiate compensation so that you can get more? I mean, I think it takes 25 years to get to $75,000 on average in teachers in this country. That's too long. I think for young people today, that seems ridiculous. That's just too long of an arc. Is this something that you're willing to really go behind, even when it gets controversial and difficult?
Mm-hmm. I think it is controversial when it is done to us. And actually, no one's been negotiating differentiated pay longer than teachers' unions. In St. Paul, it's called Schedule C. We've been differentiating the pay for people who take on extra duties for decades. And that piece is not new. We've been differentiating pay for our national board certified teachers going on our 2nd decade. And so when those ideas are crafted alongside teachers, when you sit at a table with a mutual interest of wanting to solve a problem and not create a problem that then now you want to manufacture a solution to, when you're actually solving a problem, again, I think we have decades of those examples. When there is an idea that wants to be done to teachers, you're going to still see some resistance to it. Because, again, I think what you heard from the governors, this example, is that they did some deep listening in their communities around the current conditions for teachers, what the priorities were in changing those conditions, and then the support they were able to build around those things. Starting by, the idea that you would start by listening was not lost on me.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we've got years now of built up distrust in a lot of places. And so it's going to be very difficult, I think, to rebuild the relationships, which you talked about. I wonder, another point that has come up today is the importance of having meaningful career options for teachers as they evolve in their profession. Bobby, could you speak a little bit about how your career has evolved at your school and how you started out teaching students and now you teach teachers in a way?
Yes. So I'm now a multi-classroom leader through Opportunities Culture and Public Impact. And with this position, it allows me to not only reach my impact with more scholars, but also have the opportunity to work with a team of teachers. I did have aspirations, well, I do have aspirations to become a school leader myself, but I didn't want to dive into the position without getting my feet wet first. So with a multi-classroom leader, it allows me to have the best of both worlds, so I can lead a group of adults, but I still have opportunity to be in the classroom to impact scholars directly as well. So with this position, the compensation is there, and I also have time to develop my teachers, as well as have an opportunity to teach those teachers who will one day have the same opportunity to become in this position as well as a multi-classroom leader.
So break it down, like your average week, roughly, how much time are you spending doing what?
Okay, so 2 days out of the week, I'm actually in the classroom giving direct instruction to about 35 scholars for 4 blocks. The other 3 days of the week, I am doing real-time teacher coaching with my teachers, as well as developing lessons, analyzing data, and also creating lessons for my teachers. Because one thing we want to make sure is that you can have a great amount of knowledge in your content area, but we know as to be a great teacher, you need to be able to deliver that lesson. So I create the lessons for my teachers so we can focus on their lesson delivery, so I can give them feedback on different teacher pedagogy to make sure that they have those skills needed to stay in the classroom and be successful.
And did it take a while for teachers to sort of welcome you? And I mean, we're not used to, teachers often work in isolation. Did it take a while to say, I'm your coach, and I'm here to help. I'm not here to, criticize, and kind of shift that culture?
Yeah, so the coaching model in my school evolved over time, because I can remember my first year teaching, I was given 2 teacher books, and I was thrown in the classroom without a mentor, no type of coaching whatsoever. So the coaching model in my school came about 3 years ago.
Okay.
So not only are the teachers being coached, I'm being coached as well. I'm being coached by my administrator, and my administrator is also being coached. So we just have pretty much invited this whole coaching model so that teachers know that all great people need coaches. I mean, Cam Newton, shout out to Carolina Panthers. He has a coach. He's a great quarterback, but every great teacher needs a coach as well. So we embrace this model of coaching so that now they know that I'm not there to evaluate them, but I'm just also there to develop their skills so they can impact the scholars that they teach on a daily basis.
And sorry to take this analogy too far, but Atul Gawande wrote a great New Yorker piece about coaching as a surgeon, and how what happens with surgeons and with teachers is that, in the beginning there's a steep learning curve, and they get much better at what they do. And then over time, they all are kind of in the middle, and most do not improve. And this frustrated him. And so he hired a retired surgeon to watch him do surgery. And it was very uncomfortable for everyone involved at first. But he got better because he had someone one step removed who could give him in the moment live feedback, like you said. And it's something that, at the time when I read this, just to share a quick personal story, I was working on a book, and working on a book is isolating too. And there are dark days. And I read this and I was like, I need a coach. This is the solution. So I hired actually a New Yorker writer who coaches, edits on the side, and he gave me some very brutal feedback at $75 an hour. And it was awesome. It was awesome. It made the book dramatically better. And of course, you want the feedback to say, everything's perfect, don't touch it, you're good. But in fact, that's not how it is. You need help to improve the work you do, especially dynamic, challenging, intellectual, and social emotional work of teaching. And I want to quickly just ask one thing. We were talking about, Bobby and I, before we started. One thing I like to ask teachers is if their school has ever given them business cards. Has your school ever given you business cards? No. How many teachers in here had business cards when they were, okay, and how many did not? Okay,
I got them after I earned my national board.
After you earned your national board?
Yep.
So now, arguably, business cards are silly, right? We're maybe evolving out of business cards, but I do think it's an important symbol. Because if you're in a profession where networking, collaboration, peer sharing, practicing, making each other better is core to the work of that profession, then people give you cards. When I went to Time Magazine, I was like 12. People gave me cards, right, with my name on it, and I was like, wow, right? And so that's important, and I think an interesting symbol of how we need the profession to evolve. And maybe it's not business cards, maybe it's something else, but I do think that's an interesting little symbol of what we're talking about. I think we've got a couple more minutes, and then I want to open it up to questions. But I wonder, Congressman Miller, if you could just tell us something that you think, I mean, after No Child Left Behind, there's been some progress, which you noted. We have also learned, I think, that just top-down accountability mandates will only get you so far. And that's what we've been talking about today, is how do we get to the next level? Is there something in the current debate that you find hopeful? That, in other words, this won't just be another, initiative that comes and goes? Or do you think it's too soon to say?
Well, I think it's too soon to say, but the question is, what's the common mission? I mean, I think that when you look around the world, you see the competition in the world, you think about the world that your children, your grandchildren are going to live in, you have to recognize that we have to step this all up in class. Yeah. This isn't sufficient, and we have too many losses taking place along this journey over 12 years from K through 12 that are unacceptable as a nation, and certainly to the individual that can't make it through the system or doesn't make it through the system for whatever reasons. Is clearly unacceptable to that person. And so I think that this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to, people have been speculating about STEM and the digital world and the digital classroom and the use of data and all of these things that we know can dramatically assist the education of individuals. The question is now, are we prepared to put them to use, and are we prepared to change the rules in many institutional settings so they can be used to their maximum amount? And are we prepared to recognize that we will have to do better training? I mean, let's back up to the schools of education, folks. Okay, we can start there. Are they training teachers for this century and the next century? I mean, where are we going here? And that's been a discussion that's been very difficult to have. But the fact of the matter is, there's some very poor people put out on the street representing themselves as teachers because they didn't have any access to a first-class experience in learning how to become a teacher. So we talked about doctors and lawyers here a minute ago, all go through a clinical program. Why don't teachers go through a clinical program? And I know it costs, it's this. Do you want the results or don't you? We've heard all the excuses. But we don't like the results. So yes, you got the right group of people in this room, but everybody's going to have to put the guns down on the table, and they're going to have to decide, what is this model going to look like? And it cannot be judged if it's going to move around money within a district or within a school, but is it look like it's going to get results? You have a number of organizations out here who are getting high performance, dramatic results in the very same schools that we've been lamenting since the Civil Rights Act, with the very same set of students that we've been lamenting and worried about and not succeeding with since the Civil Rights Act. And they're getting those successes. Is anybody going to ask them on a large scale, can we scale this up now in the national interest? Mm-hmm. Or are we just going to continue to see if they can do a guerrilla effort and get into this district and this school, and then maybe they'll run over here before they get discovered? This is going pretty well here. I mean, we got a lot of problems on how we approach reform because we make it, pretty homegrown.
It's like a crazy quilt of cobbled together ideas. So let me ask you this. I couldn't agree with you more. The most elegant, efficient reforms of education all over the world begin at the beginning. They begin before, sometimes even college. Why has the federal government never thrown down on this? Like, why have they never brought all the power that they have to bear, which I realize is limited, to force higher education to get serious about teacher preparation and stop just talking and start acting?
We tried it a number of years ago.
What happened?
We said, sort of like No Child Left Behind, we didn't mandate any test. We just said whatever test you're given us the results and disaggregate the data. So we said to the schools of education, we want to know how your graduates did on the state exams. And so one of our states came back and said 100%. We said, this can't be right. So having great legislative staff availability, said, go find out what's wrong here. Well, they redefined graduate. You weren't a graduate until you passed the exam. And so those who didn't pass the exam went on to do something else with their life. But those who passed now became a graduate of the state system. That was their response. That was their response to how are they doing? You know, I mean, so this has been a tug of war in schools of education. I don't think universities really value them.
Right.
They don't end up with graduates who get buildings named after them for the most part. They don't contribute to endowments because they're struggling, as we just have discussed here with the wages. So I don't think they're valued, but the question is, should the Congress value schools of education? And should the states value schools of education? Because we keep saying we want high-performing teachers. Mm-hmm. Well, let's start at the beginning of the journey.
Yeah.
Instead of coming back after 25 years and telling someone, okay, now get yourself on LinkedIn and get yourself a tweet and get yourself a this and come on, we're going to change this classroom.
Yeah,
And
trying
you
to
get help once every 6 months.
retrofit professors.
So, I mean, there's great possibility here.
Yeah.
But we all have to step into today.
Yeah.
And stop with trying to carry this luggage forward.
Yeah, and you know, there are creative solutions. I mean, we're pretty, you know, we like to think we're a pretty creative country. We could debate whether that's true, but I think in some ways we are. And it doesn't need to be the sort of either or. Last thing I'll leave you with, and I'm open to questions, is the teacher in Finland that I mentioned, Sonia. You know, one of the ways that she got in to her education college, which she was very nervous about since they only accepted 1 out of every 10 applicants, was that she spent a year after high school as a paraprofessional, as an aide in a school. That everyone in her class did that. That's how you boost your application to ed school in Finland. So it wasn't just her GPA or her SAT score, although those things mattered too. And after a year in a classroom with 12 special needs, behaviorally challenged boys, she really wondered whether she wanted to do this. I mean,
That's okay.
that's good, right? So she had to have that come to Jesus moment where she said, am I really cut out for this? And you see how Finland's then self-selecting, right, for applicants who have already got a sense of what they're up against, and they aren't just, you know, listening to the rhetoric and the romance about teaching. Thank you to all our panelists. I now want to open it up to questions. We really are eager to hear from the people in the room, and I know there's a lot of collective wisdom and opinions out there, so please raise your hand. We've got a mic going around if you've got any questions.
Thank you. My name is Taylor. I'm from Third Way, a think tank here in DC. There's been a lot of conversation about reform in teacher preparation. And I'm just curious, specifically for Mr. Miles, do you feel like in your first year you were prepared on day one? And if so, what helped you? And if not, unfortunately, what do you think would have been better for you?
Yes, my first year I went in education lateral entry, so I didn't go to school for education, so I had no background knowledge on how to teach. So pretty much my first year, I was just trying to emulate how my teachers taught me in middle school. So I had no type of training, no type of support. But throughout the years of me being a teacher, I did reach out to those veteran teachers who took me on their wings to help mold me into the teacher I am today. But my first year, I did not feel supported or have any type of background knowledge on how to be a teacher.
So,
How do they do it in Finland?
So it's a 5-year program, and you have a year of student-teacher training and lots of support once you get there. So
I think one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that teaching is easy. Teaching is so complex, it is amazing. There are some structural things that you do on a daily basis. You take roll, you collect homework, you talk about homework. But there's a huge part of your day in which you're working without a net, because they are going to ask questions of you that you may not have anticipated, and you're on the spot. So you have to have deep knowledge of the content in order to be able to field those questions. You also have to have a sense of pedagogy and their readiness for certain things. And at the same time, you have to cherish those moments where children challenge you, and the fact that you are prepared or feel prepared to answer those questions that are incredibly teachable moments that we don't often get. And I've had a lot of those to talk about, and kids are very different now. You know, 38 years ago, I was going through my teacher progression as far as becoming a teacher, and it seems so atavistic compared to what is needed right now. And when we look at it, because kids will say, and all of their knowledge is quick. It's like this. And I remember distinctly having a kid do a book report on Socrates. And if you're not careful about how you anticipate and how you ask questions, and his thing was, my report was on Socrates. He talked a lot, they killed him, the end. Why do we need to spend all this time on this? So, but the intent of the teacher was very different than what the child received. And we must analyze that constantly. And I think the one thing about becoming National Board Certified was it was so transformative to me. So even if my students taught, the way they were taught, you'd be much better off. And the sense that the transformation was not just in me, because I wasn't trying to be better than someone else. I was trying to be better than me. But I also saw the transformation in my students as well, because they do emulate what you do and what you get and the types of questions and how you feel about your craft and your profession, and then how you deliver that. And then making them leave the class every day with, wow, what's going to be next?
More questions? There was a moment in Elizabeth Green's book that came out last year where she refers to someone who points out that the average teacher makes more decisions in 2 hours than the average physician makes all day. And just since I'm going to beat this doctor analogy to death, I figured I'd bring that up here. But that's right, and part of the diabolical nature of this chicken and egg problem is that we have to reveal to people what teaching actually is before they understand why we have to pay them more and make the education preparation program more serious. So it's like, how do you disrupt that? Yeah.
Yeah, and if I can respond to that, because day to day, and actually right this very minute, we have about 5 million teachers in the United States, not in the bougie hotel ballroom, but in a classroom making all of those decisions. And we're trusting them right now, at this minute, making those, we trust them with a great deal. We trust them with my own children, right? We trust them, lots of us who are parents in this room. I was trusted the power of that, of trust, and the hypocrisy that exists right now, and that I am optimistic enough to combat. The hypocrisy of, you trust me making all of these decisions during my day job, but you are not trusting me with the voice I want to have to shape my day job, or to shape those future professionals, or to shape teacher preparation institutions. And so that I am optimistic that we can work together to break down that hypocrisy and say, yes, we actually trust you with our most precious natural resource in this country. We trust you with those thousands of decisions a day, and we are now going to trust you. Again, going back to the examples of the governors, we're going to listen to what you say you actually needed in your teacher preparation institution to feel you were ready day one, and what that work with colleagues should look like, so that you are trusted in this beautiful coaching situation you're describing, and so that you actually go into this profession and you are mindful of the accomplished practitioner you want to become. That's the trust I think we're trying to build today.
But that trust has to be built on the ability of that teacher and the, and the background of that teacher, and whether or not that teacher is doing. Let's not pretend that every parent knows exactly what's going on in the classroom and who that teacher is. In many neighborhoods, they don't have a
every
clue.
parent doesn't even know what's going on in their backyard.
No,
as the parent.
But I'm not trusting
pays
somebody to be
attention.
in my backyard all day long.
Right.
No, all I'm trying to say is the parent isn't always necessarily the best judge of what's taking place, because very often nice overcomes competent. Okay? So I think you want to know, the trust comes when you know that this person is competent and has the ability to do and deliver the services for which they've been hired. And that's an important question before you ever get to trust. Because I think, again, not everybody knows that's not how they made that decision. Their kid got placed in room 3 in school 123, and they're hoping it's working out well. That's all I'm saying is, so we don't know whether that person in that classroom can teach or not teach. We don't know that they understand the rhythm and the flow of a classroom.
I mean, my
understand.
point is
Just a
that
second, let me just
asking
finish.
them
All I'm saying is
important.
some professionalization has to be put in to the beginning of that career so that you can build that trust and that teacher can take on that trust.
It's
That's
a
what I'm
virtuous
trying to say.
cycle, right? And
I mean, this is
and
about
I
an
think,
investment.
How do you disrupt this cycle? Because you have to give trust and you have to earn.
We have a teacher shortage, I guess, in
trust.
California now because we're recovering from the recession and a lot of good things are happening in California. Schools are getting paid back the money the governor took away from them. And so we're running around plugging people into classrooms I don't know that we know a lot about. I'm saying, as a nation, can't we do this in a better fashion and really develop this talent pool of people who want to be in the talent pool? That's the exciting thing, is that even today, you know, with salaries so out of whack in terms of across the country, people still want to be in this talent pool to teach and deliver the kinds of services that Bobby's delivering to these students.
So this,
And there are
That's-
people in the talent pool right now who can help us with that.
I
understand.
want
That's
to
my
open it up
point.
to more questions. The good news here is there is a frisson of controversy here, which means there might be something real in what we're trying to do here.
Yes.
You're not going to get there without some conflict,
Oh,
without some
this isn't
disagreement.
kumbaya.
We've got a question in the middle here.
Hi, my name is Jill Schweifer. I'm from Leading Educators. And thank you. I wanted to, first of all, Mr. Miles, congratulate you on the results that you have. Reading this, it's incredibly impressive. And especially, you know, you saying you started day one as a teacher without any, you know, like you are doing amazing things for our kids in this country, and I congratulate you for that. I would love to hear from you right now, like in this role, all of the different teachers you're collaborating with and supporting and coaching, like what do you need right now as a teacher leader? Like what type of support do you need to really continue to make this level of impact? And how would you tell other schools thinking about doing teacher leadership, like what needs to be in place to make this successful and get this student achievement?
Yes. The two things that come to mind is time and also money. To be very transparent, in order for us to develop a teacher, we need time built in the school day to do that. So a lot of teachers don't teach from 9:15 to 4:15 in my school. Some teachers are coming in before school and staying late. So it need to be built inside the school day to have time to develop these different lessons, to make sure they're aligned to Common Core, to make sure they have time to analyze their data, to make sure they're driving their instruction to reach the needs of all their scholars, as well as the compensation for the work they put in. As a multi-classroom leader, I can say this is probably my second year doing this position. This is the first time I actually feel like I'm respected for my position, also being compensated for the work that I do. As a multi-classroom leader, you can make up to $13,000 to $23,000 more. $1,300 to $2,300 more on top of your regular salary. So that it allows me to not only support myself and make sure ends meet, but allows me to I actually feel respected now as a professional.
And so, you know, I'm so glad that we've come back to time because this is such an important piece of this equation, right? One of the real mysteries of the international data is that American teachers spend more time literally teaching, like in a room, instructing, than most teachers around the world. And it's unclear to me why exactly. I've tried many times to get to the bottom of this. There are different explanations in different places. In some cases, it's because we have smaller class sizes, which is something that, you know, we don't have in all places, but we are loath to give up, right? And parents are loath to give up, rightly or wrongly. So in other places, there are other reasons. But, you know, having American teachers teaching all day long without having any time to practice and plan and collaborate with each other is a recipe for failure. Like they'll never get past mediocre with that kind of structure. I wondered if, Mary Catherine, can you speak to how we get more time out of the day? I mean, what do we have to give up to get more time, like Bobby said, to do this incredibly challenging intellectual work?
Well, it's a great question because we absolutely do need more time. The good news is that there are some places figuring this out really creatively right now, whether it is like using school schedules or using really creative early release days in partnership with the community, or late start days in partnership with the community. So there are meaningful places for children to go while teachers are working together without worrying about having a substitute teacher. There are some places, actually a few, really using substitute teachers creatively to also, again, free up teachers to do that meaningful work. Not enough places, and we, the more we share those ideas, the more we can. But I will go back to, I studied this quite a bit when I was still president in St. Paul, when elementary school teachers earned preparation time, and earned it because the dominant story at that time was that elementary teachers couldn't be away from their students 1 minute. And it was, probably almost 40 years ago, where St. Paul elementary school teachers earned preparation time. And what ended up happening was, instead of a trade-off, instead of the what did we lose, what you started seeing elementary school students win was greater access to music, or to a physical education specialist, or to a world language, because they were using another specialist, another practitioner to buy that time for that student. So I actually think, in some respects, you can go back and use that as the lesson to say, what else could we offer our students if we're going to free up their elementary, middle, and high school teachers to work with their colleagues more often? What else could we offer students at the same time? And there's another example. And like I said, there are actually contemporary examples happening across the country right now around scheduling or working with the community on some early release or late start time and calendars.
And it would seem like a good one federal role, potentially, or for think tanks or organizations, is to highlight those cases, right? How do you get more time? How do you make it so that when a substitute walks into your classroom, your kids don't take a step back every single time it happens? These are things that lead to more time, and time is money, right? So we've got, speaking of time, can we get another question here? Yes, up front.
Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Brown. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher and co-director of Educators Rising, partner organization for Teach Strong. So my question would be for any of the panelists. Congressman Miller, you mentioned like building the people who want to be in the talent pool. And there was a really disturbing report from ACT earlier this year. Only 5% of high school seniors indicate interest in teaching. It's at an all-time low. So if we're waiting for young people to self-declare who wants to go for teaching when they're in college, seems pretty late in the game. How do you recommend being more proactive to engage and interest teenagers in the teaching profession?
Do you want to?
Yes. I think it's incredible the work that Educators Rising is doing to highlight the profession and to highlight what a noble profession this truly is. And when we start looking at teaching very differently than we're currently looking at it, it's going to rank with how do we look at doctors, look at the complexity of the work that you're going to be doing. The most incredible thing I think you can do is to pass on knowledge. And there used to be all these bumper stickers that says, if you can read this, thank a teacher. There is nothing that happens in this country without teachers, nothing. I don't care what profession you're in or what you choose to do, you cannot do it without a teacher. And we want it to be a skilled teacher. We want it to be people who choose a profession that they are passionate about, and to see, and I look at the students of mine that have become teachers, and I'm so proud of them, because like a lot of people said, well, they could have become anything else. Well, so could the rest of us up here as well. But we chose that profession for the reasons that we felt were so important to this country, economically, for democracy to succeed. And I think education is a key to making real system change in this world, to get people to understand how complex this job is. And if we don't, like Congressman Miller said, from the very beginning and the entry point coming into this, and I'm so happy for the work that Dan is doing, because it sets the stage for people to think about teaching as a profession, and then getting to that profession as, I'm going to become accomplished. along the way. And this is a clear codified path, a trajectory that I see for myself, and I can also become that wonderful teacher leader we have sitting here.
Yeah, I mean, some countries, every country has a mix of strengths and weaknesses, and some countries have a more kind of well-cultivated reverence for rigorous learning and learning in general, right? And so they can just kind of tap into that a little bit, and they're good to go, right? In the US, we have to cultivate that reverence for higher order learning, right? That's something we have to cultivate. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but I think, you know, how you cultivate it relates directly to this question. Of it, you know, once people see it as serious, they will begin to act like it's serious, and there's that chicken and egg problem. I wonder, Bobby, if you could, thinking about the students in your school and thinking about the work that you do, how do you think we could make more students and parents and everybody else see, like really see what teaching is it, and this might be too vague of a question, if so, just say pass. But like, how do you, I mean, you're probably maybe, I'm just guessing, but maybe the youngest person on the panel, and so you maybe remember this more than some of us do, and you also have students in the classroom every day. So how do you spark that, make it cool to be a teacher, to use a cliche?
Again, I think it's just changing the whole image and also giving teachers a different career pathway. So when you think about being a teacher, you think about being in a classroom for 23 years and just doing that for your whole entire career. But being able to offer different pathways for those teachers who want to strengthen their adult leadership skills and take on these teacher leader roles can also change the image as well. So for myself, I was 1 foot out the door to becoming a principal or assistant principal, but through opportunity culture and this new pathway that allows me to strengthen my adult leadership skills and become a teacher leader, it allows me to, again, like I said, get my feet wet before I take on that particular step in my career path. But I think allowing teachers to have different options and just to grow and to master their craft, just like in medicine and different other professions, will also change the image of education and teaching as well.
Yeah, and I think really it has to come from many directions, right? And I think as a member of the media, we also take some responsibility for telling that story, revealing what teaching looks like. Some people do it really well. Most education coverage does not. We too often revert to formulaic stories about, you know, Eva Moskowitz and Mayor de Blasio, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And meanwhile, teachers are doing incredibly fascinating, difficult work that's not being captured. It's not being revealed. So that's something I think the media also takes some responsibility for. So it has to come from many different angles. But I will say, you know, like it or not, the signal for respect in the United States is money. We can argue about whether that's right. We can pretend it's not true. But it is true. And it's not going to change, right? So this is another way we come full circle to talk about teacher pay as a very obvious, explicit signal about respect. We have time for one last question. We've got a gentleman in the middle here.
Hi, Quentin Liggins from Leading Educators. We're also a partner organization. And my question is for each of you on the panel. As you consider what strategies it takes to elevate the teaching profession, what environment do you see teachers working in? Urban, suburban, or rural? And what strategies would you suggest to differentiate elevating the profession in each one of their contexts? Because we know all the aforementioned areas are different and teachers are respected at different levels in those areas. Thank you.
Interesting.
Okay, so I see us in all of those places because children are in all of those places. And it's done very differently. You can attract teachers to the best schools and the best cities everywhere around. That's not a problem. But when we talk about rural areas, things that are not there for young, that will attract young people to those areas, we have to start thinking about how do we cultivate our own? The people who are currently there doing the work, how do we retain those people? And for me, it would be changing the culture, and I'm going to do a really self-plug here for National Board Certification, in the sense that we have cohorts of teachers. The research is clear about having cohorts of teachers go through the process together. We hold each other accountable in the sense that it would be like a surgeon going into surgery and never washing their hands. No doctor's going to let that happen. Buddy, you didn't wash your hands. So we hold each other accountable in those ways. And when we change the culture about how we feel about our own profession, outside of that profession, you're going to get that change as well. So with the residency piece, I think, when we start at the very beginning and embed this accomplished teaching notion into teacher prep, there has to be time to practice. And we need to practice in all situations, all of those situations that you talked about, because you're not going to be in just that ideal place once you finish. So that's a thing I think needs to change in teacher prep.
I think this is a great question, because I think we do have to get at the layers, both what we have in common, and that we all have students, we're all serving students, and then acknowledging the differences as well. So as someone who has spent time living in St. Paul, Minnesota as my hometown, or growing up in greater Minnesota as my hometown, very racially isolated community, and yet I am teaching in like the most gorgeous cross-section of students you could ever assemble in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so I would add to the layers of complexity also, you have a very feminized profession right now. And how not only pay, but how do we associate masculinity with professionalization right now, and what are we going to do to combat that? And also, you also have a very white teaching force right now, and how do we associate whiteness with professionalism when we have to combat that as well? Because we need to welcome everyone who is determined to meet the needs of kids to our profession. And so I think I do believe that the collective teacher voice matters in those areas. When you are asking greater Minnesota, my teachers, how do you prepare your students for a world that may not exist in this small town, but we want them to be able to navigate. It's variations of the same question we're asking my students in St. Paul. How do we prepare our students for a world that might be different than the one they're navigating right now? And starting by asking them, and then again, the benefits of partnership is that being able to tap into folks to say, our expertise took us this far, would you please plug in your expertise? And again, I go back to your coaching model, because it sounds like that you're meeting as experts, right, at the problem solving point. And that's what I would say we absolutely need. Look to that collective voice of what teachers are saying, and at the same time, please open ourselves up to those partnerships who can meet our expertise and take it that much farther.
And I like to say preparation, also having time to develop these teachers, because an effective teacher should be effective in any setting. So having time to prepare those teachers for those different settings, and not trying to isolate these different teachers in these different communities or different classrooms, but having time to collaborate and just prepare those teachers for any setting that they may have to be in during their teaching career. So.
I don't have much to add. I mean, I just think that's kind of the formula, and I think it's really about, it's about having the resources to deal with that particular situation. I don't think it's necessarily different in many ways, but it's whether or not you really have a team of teachers in a difficult school, or a team of teachers in an expansive school that can share those resources to make that delivery. But that's sort of how it is. There's not a formula for each category.
True. Thank you all. I have to wrap up now, and I want to say, just personally, not only as a journalist, but as a parent of a student in DC public schools, it is really refreshing to be talking about something that's at the core, the heart of the problem and the solution. We spend a lot of time not talking about this. So I want to thank the 40 groups who came together to make this possible. I want to offer a special shout out to Catherine Brown and her team at CAP. It's Catherine's birthday today, which you may or may not know. She's going to kill me for saying this, but they also helped make a lot of the logistics come together. It's going to take a lot of energy and fight and will to move beyond just this room, just as much as it took to fight for the past 10 years, with maybe not the results we were hoping for. So thank you all. Thank you to the panelists for being here. I've been asked to urge you to go to teachstrong.org and check out the website, which has tools for policymakers and a petition you can sign to try to move things forward. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.